In September of 1978, in the quiet Alaskan town of Sterling, an incident occurred that would haunt the community for decades. It was a parent's worst nightmare. In a place where life had always seemed safe, 13-year-old Scott Fandel and his younger sister, 8-year-old Amy, vanished. One moment, they were there. The next, they were gone, as if they had simply evaporated into thin air. Sterling was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody. Crime was rare, doors were often left unlocked, and children roamed freely. It was a place where neighbors were more like family. And yet, despite this sense of safety, 2 children disappeared without a trace, leaving a community puzzled, fearful, and desperate for answers. On the night of September 5th, Margaret Fandel, the children's mother, went into town with Scott and Amy, accompanied by her sister Kathy, who was visiting Sterling. The family decided to stop at Good Time Charlie's, a local bar and restaurant popular with the townspeople. Inside, the children sat quietly, eating whatever they liked while the adults caught up on conversation. For Margaret and Kathy, it was a normal evening of socializing. For Scott and Amy, it was an evening of mild boredom. By around 10 p.m., Margaret and Kathy returned the children to the family cabin. At the time, it wasn't unusual to leave children alone for a short period. Sterling was safe, or at least everyone believed it was. Once home, the Fandel siblings briefly visited a neighbor's house to play with friends. By around 11:45 p.m., a neighbor reported seeing the lights on at the Fandel cabin. It was a simple, ordinary moment that suggested the children had returned safely. But in the early hours of the morning, the ordinary became horrifying. When Margaret and Kathy returned home between 2 and 3 a.m., the cabin was dark. The children, who had always feared the dark, had never left the lights off at night. Inside, the kitchen told a strange story. Scott had attempted to make a meal. There was water in a pan, macaroni, and tinned tomatoes, but the food had been abandoned mid-preparation. The water was still hot, as if he had simply stepped away and never returned. Details from this night are muddled, with different accounts from family members. Some reports suggest Margaret checked the children's rooms and found their beds unmade. Others claim she didn't look at all. Regardless, she went to work the next morning, believing the children had perhaps stayed over at a friend's house. In Sterling, children often moved freely between homes. It was normal, and for a moment, it seemed reasonable. It wasn't until later that afternoon that the truth became clear. Neighboring children arrived at the cabin, looking for Scott and Amy. They were not at anyone else's home. They hadn't gone to school. They were missing. Panic set in immediately. Margaret called the police, and a search for the children began. From the very start, this case baffled investigators. The Fandel cabin showed no signs of struggle. Shoes and coats were left behind, meaning the children hadn't planned to leave. Beds remained untouched, and the half-prepared meal suggested an abrupt interruption. Every clue or lack thereof only deepened the mystery. Searches of the surrounding wilderness proved fruitless. Scott and Amy were familiar with the woods and wild areas around Sterling. If they had wandered off, there would have been evidence of footprints, discarded clothing, or signs of an accident. But there was nothing. It was as if the children had disappeared into thin air. As days passed, theories began to emerge. Some wondered if someone at Good Time Charlie's had overheard that the children would be home alone. Could a stranger or someone familiar with the family have planned their abduction? Others looked closer to home. The children's father, Roger Fandel, had moved to Arizona after a difficult divorce. He flew back to Sterling to assist in the search, but he was never charged. Yet suspicions lingered, particularly within the family. Years later, a woman who had dated Roger in 1978 reportedly approached a family member, offering information about the children's fate for $5,000. Nothing came of it. Margaret's brother believes Amy may still be alive, somewhere in Alaska or California, while Scott may have been killed shortly after their disappearance. But there is no evidence to support this claim. Another theory, though less likely, suggests the children wandered into the wilderness on a late-night adventure. Yet even this idea falters. There were no footprints, no blood, no torn clothing, nothing to suggest they had ventured into the forest. The case gradually went cold, leaving a vacuum filled by speculation and fear. The community of Sterling, once defined by trust and familiarity, now carried the shadow of a night they could never fully understand. Internet sleuths and amateur detectives have since proposed ideas ranging from the plausible to the extreme, even suggesting extraterrestrial involvement. But for law enforcement, and for the family, these theories remain just that, unproven conjecture. Despite countless hours of investigation, interviews, and speculation, no new evidence has ever surfaced. No trace of the children, no confession, no definitive answer. Every attempt to revisit the case has yielded the same result: an empty trail, a cold trail, a trail that stops abruptly at the edge of the Fandel cabin. 45 years later, the children's story continues to capture the imagination of those who hear it. It is a story of innocence interrupted, of a community forever changed, and of parents left without closure. The forest that the siblings once explored freely now holds its secrets tightly, keeping the truth just out of reach. Whoever knows what happened may be long gone, or may carry the weight of silence, unable or unwilling to speak. For families, for investigators, and for all who have followed the case, the question remains: what truly happened to Scott and Amy Fandel? Was it a crime of opportunity? Was it someone they knew? Or did fate conspire in a way that left no evidence, no trace, and no answers? The cabin, the kitchen, the half-prepared meal, all remain frozen in time, a haunting snapshot of a night that changed everything. The case may be cold, but hope is not entirely lost. Perhaps someday, someone will come forward. Perhaps someday, the truth will finally be known. Until that day comes, the story of Scott and Amy Fandel serves as a solemn reminder that even in places where we feel safest, the unimaginable can happen. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. As always, stay curious and stay safe.